Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the day 3 of the Frames of Reference online postgraduate student seminar. This is the 7th panel in this seminar, and today's panel is titled Viewing Cinema. We'll be having 2 presenters today. There were 2 more presenters who were supposed to, but they had to drop out due to ill health. Each presenter would be given about 15 minutes to present her paper. And after both the papers are presented, we'll be taking a question-answer session. So I request all the attendees to post their questions in the Q&A chat box, and it'll be read out later. So I hope I welcome all of you once again. So I'd first like to welcome Bhavna Shrey, who's a PhD scholar at the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Her paper today is titled The Interactions of Popular Forms of Feminism with Communicative Capitalism, an insight in OTT platforms' female spaces. So Bhavna, if you could share your screen and start off, you'll have 15 minutes to do your presentation.
Thank you for the introduction. As the chair has already introduced, the title of my paper is The Interactions of Popular Forms of Feminism with Communicative Capitalism, an insight in OTT platforms' female spaces. Before I go on to discuss what are the critical delineation and their subsequent points and central arguments, I would like to read out a quote from Andy Ziesler's very quotable text that came out in 2016, interestingly titled, "We Were Feminists Once." And she says, "I have seen pop culture and media transform feminism for better and worse. And feminism in turn changed pop culture and media. But as I started to write this book, something weird happened. Feminism got cool." Now we'll return to this a while later, but let me dwell on the central argument of the paper, which is designed along the critical premise proposed by Jodi Dean that lays bare the structures governing the modern form of late capitalism, and also, very interestingly, the subtle workings of capitalist economies and societies that engage with these formats to appropriate ideologies and ideological functions into neat little packets of entertainment modicums. What emerges from here is a very nuanced, very complex, but also very significant form of capitalism, communicative capitalism. If I were to use Dean's own words, she uses the term to refer to the form of late capitalism in which values heralded as central to democracy materialize in networked communication technologies. The next question that would naturally arise from a statement such as this would be, what exactly are these values and the methods through which they become accessible? So values, she lists, are ideals of access, inclusion, discussions, and participations that are realized through expansions, interactions, and interconnections at global platform. Keeping this in mind then, what this paper proposes to do and has tried to do is to coagulate digital media platforms within the larger theoretical framework of communicative capitalism, while also trying to understand the fate of contemporary feminism within the microcosm of the OTT universe. Now I've divided my paper into 2 parts. Part 1 is popularizing feminism, positions, platforms, and paradoxes. And this is further divided into 4 not really subsections. They are bind together, they're connected to each other. They also follow a certain rationale, but let me try and iterate it for you, and let's see if I can illustrate it. So the first critical delineation point that turns into methodological praxis of this paper is the attempt of building inroads as the rise of OTT platforms interacts with formats of feminism within the entertainment spaces. Popular feminism, as it emerged in the 21st century, was very quick, almost extremely quick, to attract an overwhelming amount of hostility from traditional factions of academe, as in academic feminism, which saw it either as superficially balanced at best and as a companion to popular misogyny at worst, which, while conceptualizing, the term begins to speculate upon this very nature of privileging, which admits at the outset that popular feminism And this is Sarah Bennett Weiser, who says that popular feminism exists most spectacularly in an economy of visibility, mind you, visibility, where it often remains just that. If one were to collude to such a critical standpoint, then it leads one to see this entire universe, which is microcosmic universe, which is being created as we speak, into creating selling points of a democratized content, a very Silicon Valley perpetuated term that we meet every day now, which again is connected in subversive and subtle ways to how is it that one can market ideology and lean into a visual taxonomy that functions through algorithms of the taste space. What is it that I'm actually trying to say here is that the preconceived notions around the creation and also proliferation of more democratized content, single quotes, on the OTT platforms also more or less leads to a connected belief that the space was more liberal in its politics. Feminism and the popular narratives around women's empowerment fit neatly into this category that abets and gets and begets communicative capitalism. After all, as has been illustrated by Dean herself, the concept of communicative capitalism reformats as criticism the neoliberal idea of the market as the site of democratic aspirations, indeed as the mechanism by which the will of the demos manifests itself. There are two questions that arise, and they're pressing questions as one feels, and which is connected to the applicability of how is it that spectatorship, viewership, and the idea of information technology come together to rehash the arguments that have already been made into arguments that feel new in neoliberal contexts, of course. What we have then is a plethora of shows that populate OTT giants, such as Netflix and Prime Video, and that promise to tackle the women's question creatively. It's a suspect category, but creatively, with suggestions that pop up with sudden intensity around International Women's Day, for example, or Mother's Day, asking you to watch either Bandit Queen or English Winglish or Americom, or if the algorithm has been very successful, it will turn aesthetics of taste into metadata, which will then move on to create subsections and subtexts of what is it that is being consumed and what is it that can be propagated to a very large extent. So this, one argues, perhaps makes for the greatest paradox created and caused almost single-handedly by the popular culture of our times, that the difference between political campaigning and advertising cannot be told easily anymore. The boundaries are so far blurred that one wonders in which narrative were they ever erected, if ever. To create a database that in turn generates finance capital out of people's screen time, and if one were to answer this, one thinks back at the incisive analysis undertaken by David Harvey, who had explained the efforts of neoliberalism as providing a guided, or one would like to say blinded, tour into a rapidly technologized global marketplace. And he says, neoliberalism's endeavor to bring all human action into the domain of the market requires technologies of information creation, one, and capacities to accumulate, store, transfer, analyze, and use massive databases to guide decisions in the global marketplace. And the global marketplace had shifted in favor of pool feminism, as Zisler had pointed out, and as I also pointed out in the beginning of the presentation. So within this highly specific context, what is it that one faces? And how do we even begin to look through the lenses of the silence which exists, but the noises that have become white almost, and the absences which are so flimsy now that what one witnesses, beholds, has become reality of sorts. This leads me to part 2 of the paper, evoking ideas and affirming identities, reading through visual texts. What I've attempted to do in this section of the paper is not really a close study of the shows that are available, but more of a symptomatic study within the reference of a Brady and Cohen-esque mode of symptomatic study. What you see on screen is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's put it like that. But it is almost a given now that the most common, almost run-of-the-mill theorization has been of the motherhood trope. And it has been revisited so many times that enough ink has already been spilled. The reason why I also return to it is in a revisionist mode is to try and understand the endless repetition of certain projects of visual mediums that turn it into easy tropes of consumption. And also within the highly specific context of the content being streamed for the Indian audience, the trope, of course, returns with a powerful vengeance. This is attested by what we consume, and this is fairly becoming a forerunner in a subculture of genre creation. So then there is, of course, and one has to admit to it, that a certain unassailable pull in arming a grieving mother with a firearm, something that most of these shows are bent on doing, the immense drama of the ways leading to revenge thriller that has a lot of charm. But the visual taxonomy of the shows, they're also geared towards a certain realization, as one would posit. It is to look at the limitations and boundaries, which are subject, of course, to the central thematic argument, but the interactions then that take place in the wake of such a formulation, which is almost textbook, is to side with the banality of unquestioned media consumption, or to engage rigorously at the cost of utter disillusionment. And one doesn't have easy answer to that, but one does hark back to the pushback of 80 and early 90s, where a lot of misogyny was centered around one question of whether feminists had an image problem. So going ahead from there then, this overwhelming significance which is placed on the idea of victimhood and also victimization worked famously. Also created what capitalist regimes always want to create, letting out avenues. But the problems begin when one also tries to look at the fact that the impulse to struggle then within such an all-pervasive tropification would make the impulse to struggle itself a suspect, and there is no returning from there. So one simply wasn't injured enough, hurt enough, or lost enough unless vulnerability on screen could be proved and claimed. And so there is no easy way out, no ready-made answers available to how to struggle through this bind. But one's purpose in undertaking to posit an insight has been to critically try and delineate at least the many ways in which these challenges often go unnoticed. As Dean had said, communicative capitalism's consumerism, personalization, and therapeuticization create discursive habitats for the thriving of the victim identity. It would be a little hasty to try and associate it with moral standards of judgment, because that is always a counterproductive approach. But decentering concerns and movements that lead to neoliberal spaces within an already created space would mean that we are perhaps left with more questions than answers, and the grappling leads to tangential formats of approaching something which is the next revolution post the television. I think I've spoken my bit. I would like to answer questions as and when they are asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. And you stuck to the time limit, actually. Thank you so much for that. All right. So next, I call upon Ankita Ghosh, who is a second-year master's student at the Department of Media and Cultural Studies, TIS. And her paper is titled The Bollywood Item Song, Gendered Aspects of Creation and Consumption of Popular Item Songs. It's all yours, Ankita.
Thank you, Deepti. I'll get started. Hi everyone. So my presentation is titled The Bollywood Item Song, Gendered Aspects of Creation and Consumption of the Popular Item Number. The thing is, while Bollywood has always used song and dance sequences to make a blockbuster cinema entertaining for the audiences, a particular kind of these have come up as a ritual to make a box office hit. And this is usually a hypersexualized performance and used as a promo to bring a viral element to the Bollywood movie. So decoding the item number, there are certain key points that one notices in these item numbers. One is that it is a carefully constructed visual spectacle. There is a heterosexual male gaze in it, and there's a construction of the voyeur. It is conceptualized with the goal of accentuating the objectification of the performance. Everything from the choreography, the cast, costume, set design, lights, and camera are specifically chosen for this aim. And there is a focus on the sensual sort of music and lyrics that add to the allure of the performance. So the visual spectacle, item numbers are usually constructed to make for a spectacle that reduces the performer to a sum total of her body parts rather than as a whole person. The term item number is itself very derogatory because item literally translates into objects, and it is the objectification of the performing women as item girls. The male gaze. So the item girl is reduced to the sum of her body parts, and the heterosexual man and his pleasure becomes front and center in the way these song and dance sequences are brought to life. And even though the performers in an item number occupy the majority of the screen time, the camera work is specifically constructed to focus on the body parts and make it sensual for the viewers. The voyeur. The item number is usually accompanied by an on-screen audience, and it is usually a crowd of rowdy men who leer at the performer. One usually also finds the male protagonist present in the scene, but then this person is also an impassive audience, and he has a moral superiority and the strength of character that makes him different from the other men in the background. I took up 3 examples of songs Sheila Ki Jawani, Munni Badnaam Hui, and Fevicol Se. And one notices the objectification in the performances of all the 3 of these. There are certain commonalities that come up in all of the item songs that one views, and the way that these are shot and edited. Framing of the item number. One usually finds evocative choreography that include the purposeful thrusts of the breaths in the pelvis. This effect is also exaggerated by the camera work that instead of displaying the performer as a whole, involves a series of rapid cuts that focus on her body parts. The costume is almost always a sexualized version of the Indian attire, traditional Indian attire that we know of. And the set design and the lights are also carefully chosen to accentuate the sensual mode that is a predominant feature of the item number. The oral aspects. So the item songs one usually comes across have a particular kind of female voice that is full-bodied and sensual in some sort of way. And the lyrics in these songs are also, as we move ahead in time, they are also getting more bolder in the objectification by dehumanizing, infantilizing, and analogizing women to food items. And there is a gendering of the musical aspects which dictate the meanings that one can make from these popular item songs. So I conclude that as feelings of national identity start to grow, Bollywood is also seen as a platform for the construction of such an identity, and it becomes more than just popular entertainment. It can be seen as a place for cultural construction, representation, and influence. With the item song, what we see is that there's not just an affirmation of the gender roles, but there's also a glorification of these said roles. There is the sexual prowess is of the item girl is specifically used to excite the male audience, and one ultimately sees that there is a debilitating social roles are perpetuated in the construction of these item songs. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankita. That was short and simple and sweet. All right, so I request all attendees to send in questions in the Q&A box, but we'll start off with some questions anyway. So my first question is to Bhavna. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's sort of like a generic question, right? Which I wanted to start off with. So while OTT platforms have widened the spaces for feminist content, right? Do you think popular feminism has also been able to capture the traditional cinema distribution markets, like in recent years? For example, like there's an impact. Do you think there's an impact of popular feminism on the market logic of theater distribution collection?
Right. So let me try and break it down, right? Because it's a combination of three questions, and also because I think because of the time, I could not go ahead and foreground it perhaps as much as I would have liked to do. The way we see feminism now, especially the feminism, not the feminism that we study, the feminism that gets appropriated through visual medium, is a feminism that has arrived. And it has arrived from a very long tradition of feminist film criticism, which started taking shape in the wake of the second wave of feminism in the early 70s. Now, popular feminism is extremely new, but it works in connection with two different types of feminism, which is neoliberal feminism and the feminism which is celebrity feminism. So now all these three are connected with the common thread of media literacy. What we understand of feminism is what the media is doling out, and the media is largely concentrated to, it's very specific, it's very contextual, but it's limited to certain formats, right? So whether popular feminism has impacts on film tradition is probably not an answer I would like to give very hastily, because there are still trends that are in progress all over the world, especially with the rise of OTT platforms, more accurately digital media platforms. The neoliberal scourge of rebranding is greater than ever. So terminologies are constantly interacting with each other. And from this conversation arrives the question of the birth and death of feminism every 5 years. So that parlance is still alive, but how is it getting appropriated is a question that one can ruminate upon. Right? If I were to illustrate it, I would say that a film like Thelma and Louise, for example, would not be possible without feminist traditions. It's a film rooted there, right? But when you look at Wonder Woman, for example, it's a film that codifies what it means to be an empowered identity, and also see the shift between women empowerment and it's slowly and gradually shifting into girl power post-90s. So these are all critical tenets, right? And again, I would not be too hasty to pass judgments on them. I'm trying to say that we have a coagulated technological form, and it is the right time to reflect upon it. Does that answer your question?
I mean, I was also wondering about Theater, yeah. I mean, you know, the spaces of, because the theater distribution system has been very much, you know, by the logic of how much money the male stars bring in. So I was wondering, you know, about
male stars bring in. Let's see, the traditional modes of film production, distribution, and exhibition has certainly gone for an overhaul. Like, we do not really approach it the way we did, right? And there is also something else to be understood here, which is the parity between dominant cinema spaces and alternative cinema spaces, right? And they would always have their own specific politics. So when you ask me theater distribution systems, I believe that it's extremely specific. depending upon the thematic concerns and depending upon a newer category of critical delineation, which is now commonly understood as commodity audience. Although it's not exactly new, it came in 1978, but it's being reappropriated now. So critical methodology is pretty much there, right? How is it going to translate in future is a little difficult to answer as of now.
Thank you so much. I'll get back to you with more questions. So the next question is for Ankita. This is a question from Harmanpreet. How do you see the role of mainstream female actors in item songs? Is it still the same today as opposed to a decade earlier?
Yeah, so I think what I've noticed is as we have moved ahead in time, it's been, while the item number was something that was relegated to a particular sort of actress who was seen as an item, a dance performer, to now we are seeing that there are more famous actors, so to say, who are performing these item numbers. For example, like we've seen how Kareena and Katrina are in perform in Sheila Ki Jawani and Fevicol Se, and the sort of attention that those songs got, and even just recently how we saw the song called Uwantawa and Samantha being a part of that song and sort of attention that she brought to the song. So I think it has definitely changed from it being a space for a particular sort of actress to now it becoming more mainstream, and more actresses willing to be a part of it more openly, I would say.
All right, thank you. Since you brought up Uwantawa song from Pushpa, I had a question that I thought of. So how do you read a song like that? Because the lyrics of the Uwantawa song are seemingly progressive, it's talking about, you know, society's hypocrisy when it comes to women's clothing, but the filming is that of a typical item song, right? And also,
yeah, exactly.
Does the politics of this item song get complicated by who stars in it? For example, in this particular song, Samantha, in her real life, she's also going through a divorce, a much publicized divorce with a male star, Naga Chaitanya, and a section of media has been citing her bold roles and her performances in item songs like this as a reason for her divorce as well. So how does that complicate, you know, how do we view the agency of the female star who does an item song then?
Oh my God, that report is, I don't know what to say, but yeah, so even I think that even though the lyrics in the song are somewhat progressive in a sense, but then you see the way that the song is shot and the sort of it's just the traditional item song that we have seen, and the way that it's constructed, it's just the same. And even I don't know, just I think Samantha was also someone who had demanded a lot of money for this song, because she had said that she didn't particularly feel like the sort of person who would do an item song. So her doing this was like a big deal, and that was a big news, I think. But yeah, just you also bringing up the factor that her divorce and her taking up bolder roles, all of this just complicates it so much. I don't know, I'm just thinking about a lot right now.
Get back to the question if you like later.
Yeah.
So I'm asking questions in no particular order. So there's a comment for you, Bhavna. It's by Sango Bidani. Wonderful presentation. I was wondering, how does one look at an OTT platform like Alt Balaji, where in the garb of providing content geared towards women-centric series, it gets morphed into hypersexuality?
So we have finally arrived at the platform where you asked me this question, I answered this. He has asked me this question earlier also, but I told him that I have not looked at Indian OTT platforms. I'm very grateful to Tess that I did it now, and I can answer this. Right, Sango, we are back to the question of symbolic capital. You see, the buying and selling of ideological movements would always carry symptoms and markers of what is it that can be sold, withheld, propagated, regurgitated, and then brought back into currency. So it is nothing else. I mean, it's going to sound a little essentialist at the moment, but the way I perceive it and the way I try to study it, the critical delineation is actually extremely simple. It is that this has been equated very simply with what empowerment, quote unquote, should look like, right? So in a very nuanced way, perhaps, if you really try to layer it, right, it can associate it with questions of bodily autonomy. But then that would make it again extremely problematic, because whose agency is at stake, right? Like, because there are so many players in this game, the question of agency is opened up again. So this question I'm going to answer with another question, and we will discuss it. But this is something that I've thought about, Sango. Thank you so much. You always veer me in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, this is again for Bhavna, and this is from Shilpa ma'am. So she says, I love the phrase, the birth and death of feminism every 5 years. Is there an OTT text that you think departs from these appropriated forms of understanding? Is there an OTT text that parallels how you see, say, Thelma and Louise, as you said in your response to my question? Any representations that you think actually speak of an alive feminism?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. And this is something that I've been grappling with while the writing of my thesis also. I'm close to submission, and this makes a major chunk of what I'm trying to conclude with. The livability and the shift from representative methods to lived body experiences to finally what is going within the visual taxonomy of screen digests. And from this journey comes the answer to this question. There are of course texts that run parallel and that still carry the spirit of the currency with which feminism actually gains ground, which is of equality, of not the kind that media literacy programs have propagated, but something that emerged out of the second wave, of liberal spaces, and also the right to be within a larger, again, representative methods. But I'm thinking now of a movement that gained a lot of currency a while ago, which was #MeToo. It also had the maximum backlash that I have personally studied within these micro movements of feminism. And there are two films that I would like to comparatively analyze very quickly, because I don't know how much time that I have. Two films such as The Bombshell, Jay Roach's, and Kitty Green's The Assistant. They both look at #MeToo and what it did to Hollywood space of propagating empowerment narratives. But one is extremely loud, so much so that it absolutely decenters the narrative of it all. Right, the camera movements, if you see, the close-up would only be in the woman's body. So the entitlement problem is still there. The camera is still pretty much male. And in the inaugural address of this very conference, I think Meenakshi ma'am mentioned how the time is actually ripe to revisit Malve. I might not completely ascribe to it, but it does circumvent that we may look beyond homogenization. So Bombshell versus The Assistant which is much quieter and which looks at the silent violence of harassment, which almost always goes unaddressed. So there are also films like The Lost Daughter, which, because I was talking about motherhood trope, I'm also trying to look at how there are films that are trying to move away from the overtly naturalized concept of what motherhood trope would do. Like the first feminist text within feminist film criticism was actually Molly Haskell's From Reverence to Rape. So it's pretty much like into the established tradition. But there have been counter movements and subtexts and parallel running texts that question the very process of naturalizing within visual taxonomies. I hope I answered your question, ma'am. Did I go on for too long? I tend to do that.
No, it's okay. We actually have time today, so you can, both of you can take time to answer. So I will get back to you again with some questions. And Shilpa ma'am says, thank you. Oh, sorry. Thanks for that not so complex response. She says it's all right. So this a question again to Ankita. So this is by an anonymous attendee. Oh, she says, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope
I
you're
just
seeing
got
the chat.
flustered. Okay, yeah.
All right. So this is an anonymous question by an anonymous attendee to Ankita. So how do you view the item number as voyeurism against the item girl's expression of sexuality?
I would say that the voyeurism aspect, it comes up as, there's this construction of an on-screen audience that we see in an item number, and it sort of gives leeway to the audience viewing the film to like men watching men taking pleasure in the item song, and that sort of gives some sort of agency to the viewers to also take part in that voyeuristic pleasure and enjoy the item number that is a part of the movie. Against item girls' expression of sexuality, it's just rather than that person's the item girl's expression, it's more about how the camera frames the woman and the kind of shots that are used to frame this woman rather than her agency to perform, I would say.
Can I add something to Ankita's response?
Sure.
The panelists can talk to each other.
Yes, of course.
So this is a sort of a suggestion, Ankita. If you are interested, try and look into the history of it all, right? Because when it actually comes to be in the 60s, it is aesthetically extremely powerful because it derives from the cabaret. And although there would always be value judgments associated with it, there was also reappropriations happening in terms of giving currency to that aesthetic, right? And there would always be a certain persistent ontology that goes into it. So try to like widen the scope a little bit, right? That would give you more ways to think about it and also better answers to move ahead from here.
Definitely. Thank you, Bhavna.
So this is again a question to Ankita by Shilpa ma'am. So how might we read item numbers to the way in which historian Charu Gupta discusses the female gaze in her EPW piece, Visual Pleasures for the Female Gaze? What do films like Om Shanti Om and Savarya, which Gupta discusses in relation to the focus on the bodies of Shah Rukh Khan and Ranbir Kapoor, do to our idea of the gaze in cinema?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that movies like Savarya and Om Shanti Om do help us somewhat subvert the genre of the male gaze, but also you see how limited these are in like if you look at the item girls and the item songs with women, the number of such songs coming up in a year, and then also see the lack of the male perspective, the male item performer, or the female gaze in these. So just the difference in the way, the number of these performances that are like, it's so limited that there's hardly a scope of comparing the two, or the virality that both bring about, I would say. And when you look at the item songs by women and the women item performers, you see how these also take on like they're not restricted to just the movie, but they also take on a different shape after these are out and about in the space. So you I don't know, there's just these songs just take on a different currency, I would say, which you don't really see in the male item performances.
Okay. I guess a related question by another anonymous attendee. Nowadays, a lot of mainstream actresses are doing item numbers, when earlier it was mostly certain dancers / actresses who would do these songs, right? Like Rakhi Sawant or somebody. Does this impact the way item numbers are perceived in any way?
Not the way that, I would say, the way that these are constructed have not really changed over time, but when it becomes more of the famous actresses who take up item numbers with time, what we've also seen that they gain some sort of acceptability of sorts. Like it's okay to like this particular song and enjoy this song when it's a popular actress, like say Kareena. When it's also a famous actress, I would say that they bring a different sort of viewership and followers who then enjoy this song more than something that was, say, just limited to people like Rakhi Sawant. It was then seen as something that you don't really own up to enjoying or seeing just separately from the movie. But right now, when you have mainstream actresses taking up these roles, there's like a celebrity factor that comes with it.
Okay, thank you. So another question for Bhavna. How do you think series like FOMO Shorts that market their content on feminist message and women empowerment can be placed in the rise of women-centric content with the advent of OTT platforms? It's by an anonymous attendee.
I actually have 4 more shots included in my longer paper, but I did not speak of it here because I thought I was going to, overreach time. First of all, I take exception to the fact that one would like to associate 4 more shots with women empowerment. It's simply not going to cut it. And that is why in my first response, I spoke about the difference between women empowerment and girl power. And in the light of that, perhaps one can approach this question better. That's how the way I look at it, right? Now, 4 more shots, which is now in its 2nd season, and I think production has already started for a 3rd one, tells us something about sustainability of marketable ideology. And it's not a simple veneering. It's something that goes deeper into how consumer culture itself formulates itself. So shouting vagina loudly sitting on a beach doesn't really cut it for empowerment narratives. The idea of privileging, you see, I mean, there are layers and layers to this, right? The International Women's Day was brought by whom? It was Clara Zetkin, and she was talking about working class women's problems. Look what it has become. Look the way we approach it now. You put it in Google, International Women's Day. Clara Zetkin would not be mentioned unless you mention it in the search bar. So there are layers and layers of, again, negation that has happened into feminist oeuvre, and one must be very careful with how is it that we approach the diegesis of it all. So 4 more shots is successful because it clearly and very cleverly conceals what can be problematic. It's a narrative of privilege, not empowerment. I'm sorry, I try not to sound too opinionated, but sometimes it just gets to me. Right.
So actually, I had a question, maybe somewhat related to that. So since you quoted Sarah Banit-Weiser on how popular feminism exists in the economy of visibility, right? So what are the various ways in which this visibility is privileged in content? And has the rise of popular feminism come at the risk of invisibilizing other feminisms?
Can you repeat your first question again? I understood the second one.
So in a sense, what are the various ways in which this visibility is privileged? Because we're talking about, popular feminism existing in the economy of visibility, right?
Yeah, so Bennett-Weiser's is a very comprehensive study. And it is something that I constantly return to because of the question that you asked just now. The narrative of privilege, what goes onto the screen, what is shown and what is consumed, is decided again by the audience commodity, but it is also decided by the socio-cultural political topography of the moment itself. What is it that you hark back to, and what is it that you frame as emergent framework itself? So popular feminism, there's a lot of backlash against it, but there is certain merit in making the codes of feminism accessible to one and all. At least within existence of an ideology, it's going to get some grounding. So that's my answer to your first question. And the second one was, how do I look at?
Yeah, and has the rise of popular feminism come at the risk of invisibilizing other feminisms?
That is always going to happen. There's no way out of it, right? If Beyonce is going to stand on the MTV Gala stage with feminism in Technicolor, wearing a glittery dress, it's going to send, and Bell Hooks is going to talk about it. Even within academic circuits, it's going to create another prototype of what is it that within codes of privileging, quotas of privilege is created, right? So there are always, that is why celebrity feminism is so closely associated with popular feminism. But there is another question that I often ask myself. Do issues or do concerns stop to matter because they're privileged, right? Within absences, then, if we completely pull back all stops, right, it is going to go into a certain abyss from where there would be no salvaging. So there has to be a certain balance. I'm going to mythologize the whole thing right now, but I do believe that there has to be a certain balance. So we need to move away from the narrative of lean in and girl power. But it does not simply say that, oh, these concerns are not concerns good enough. Like, we will not engage with them, privileged or not. Did I answer your question?
Yes. So there's another related question from Harmanpreet, actually, to 4 more shots, actually. So she asked, how would you account for the creators of some of these shows who are also women? For example, 4 more shots. 4 more shots has producers, writers, directors who are women.
Does feminism exist purely within the purview of womanhood? And that should answer it.
All right. So Ankita, there's a question again by an anonymous attendee. How would you differentiate between an exploitative item song and an erotic one? What's the harm in having a sensual song and dance? Is it only male gaze? Can it be a queer gaze too, as we see in debate? Actually, it's a little. How would you differentiate between them? Basically, I mean, that's the question. Or are all item songs exploitative?
I think the difference comes up in the connotations of the lyrics that one sees in the item songs. So if you look at songs like Fevicol Say, where there are lyrics like Meto Tanduri Murgi Hu and things like that, that just automatically denotes the exploitative tone of these songs. And that itself says a lot about how these songs are constructed. And I would not say that all of them are exploitative or have this they are created with the agenda of being exploitative, but it's more about the connotations that it gives off in the way that like both the way that the lyrics come together and also the way that these are brought on screen, and the way that these are framed. So I think that's what denotes whether the song is exploitative or not.
Thank you. And then there's another question for Bhavna that's come in. With the proliferation of television shows tagged with strong female lead, it would seem that Netflix has adopted a gendered mode of address, a mode that employs demographic factors to determine recommendations. Could you speak a little more about the representation of women and femininity in these shows like Mai or Leela in the context of a post-feminist media culture, and what it means for even films like Thelma and Louise to be categorized in such terms?
Right, the tagging is happening because of the algorithm which is in place. And it is also happening because it is able to decode the choices and the preferences, what is being watched. For example, Netflix for a while has been doing top 10 shows. So you know that the surveillance is at its max. It's happy, it's all ubiquitous, all pervasive. So Netflix adopting a gendered mode of address, does it do so or not, is a layered argument, right? Because one tries to look at gendering itself, and in the times that we live in, gender is not really a dichotomous category. It's no longer existent within, you know, one or two. So a woman character in a strong lead would not necessarily mean that you are within the purview of a feminist narrative or diegesis. It does not necessarily translate into that. Could you speak a little bit more about Mai and Leila? Right, I intended to do that, and I am aware of the fact, and the paper is mindful of the fact, that Leila is a series and Mai is a film. And so they have their own critical boundaries to ascribe to. No, sorry, they're both right. They're both series. I was thinking of something. I was thinking of Thelma and Louise, right? No, I'll come to that later. They're both series, yes. Where Leila fails, Leila's failure is actually Mai's success, in the way that it completely bypasses looking at character interiority. When one begins to study films and visual mediums as such, the first thing that we are taught is the difference between space and place. And the blurring in Mai is so perfect that one doesn't, if you're paying close attention to it, you don't really realize that the interiority of the character is almost gone. You don't see within, which makes for a very easily assailable narrative. It's very easily there. It's right there for you to consume. Also, there are image graftings. Now, both begin with the promise of motherhood, but Leila fails rather miserably because it moves into all directions. And by fourth, you know that it probably will not be able to come back from the failure that it has caused for itself. But Mai succeeds in ways that it creates and recreates extant models of motherhood of contemporary India within revenge tropes. So arming a woman with a firearm, as I said during the course of my paper also, will always vacillate between thrill and cheap thrill, visual thrill and cheap thrill. And from this arrives the context. Post-feminist media culture, so Mai and Leila, I would not say that they are products of a post-feminist media culture. They are actually harking back to the very traditional liberal feminist, socialist liberal feminist traditions. So that is definitely not post-feminist in any way. Thelma and Louise has been categorized, interestingly, through academic circuits. So for texts like Women's Cinema, Annette Kuhn, first edition 1982, second 1994. She mentions it both times, and in the postscript, she actually goes on talking about it. And the idea that movements, feminism as not just as an ideology, but as a sum total of social movements, would always have a lot to contribute to visual mediums is actually pretty rooted now. So it has become a pigeonhole of academic faction. It's a canon. It's not even one's categorization. It exists within the canon of what it means to be a feminist film. And there's a documentary in 2018 that talks about the making of Thelma and Louise, which means that it is pretty much in currency. Then you have beer, with that blue thunderbird moving into the Grand Canyon. Images perpetuate themselves and regurgitate themselves with a pace which is very difficult to keep abreast of. But these repetitive tropes would tell you that post-feminism is there and also not there. So the liminal spaces in which it inhabits itself is an interesting question and answer within itself. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much, Bhavna and Ankita. I think there are no more questions left. If there are any more questions, please do put it in the Q&A box. Otherwise, we can wind up the session. Thank you both of you for the papers that you presented and for the wonderful discussion that followed. The next panel would be at 3:45, and it's titled Horror Through a Gendered Lens. And I request all the attendees to log back in at 3:45 for that session. Thank you.
Thank you,
presenters, once again.
You have been an absolutely wonderful chair. So rooted.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed.
Thank you so
Congratulations, much. Ankita.
Same to you. Congratulations, Bhavna.
Bye.
Attendees can also choose to stay logged in, and then at 3:45 the next panel will start. Somebody has raised their hand. Just 1 second. No, I don't. I think it's not there. All right. So I hope to see you back again at 3:45. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.